Hello and welcome to our video. Today, we're diving into a subject that sparks heated discussions across Europe: asylum seekers and their role in our societies. There are numerous myths and prejudices surrounding asylum seekers, and often the facts that could help dispel these misunderstandings are missing. In this video, we'll address these myths head-on and reveal the truth behind the headlines. The media often portrays asylum seekers and refugees as helpless victims, seeking safety and shelter. However, there is little attention paid to the negative consequences that their migration has on host countries. While it's crucial to offer protection to those in need, it's equally important to look at the other side of the coin. What happens when these migrants aren't really in danger, but instead come for better economic opportunities? We need to acknowledge that migration is not just a challenge for the migrants themselves, but for the societies that take them in. Migration impacts public services, welfare systems, and social cohesion, and we must consider the long-term consequences. So let's take a critical look at what really happens when people seek asylum. What are the real challenges faced by the host countries? We'll explore the truth beyond the rosy portrayals and address the negative consequences that are often swept under the rug. What are asylum seekers? Before we dive into the myths and misconceptions surrounding asylum seekers, let's first clarify what an asylum seeker really is. An asylum seeker is someone who is seeking protection in a foreign country because they are being persecuted in their home country. This persecution can be based on political opinion, ethnicity, religion, or social group. However, recent years have shown that many asylum seekers are coming from countries where they face no immediate danger, where their lives are not in jeopardy, and where their reasons for seeking asylum are more about improving their economic situation than fleeing actual persecution. Many asylum seekers arrive from countries that are not embroiled in war or conflict. They are seeking a better life in Europe, capitalizing on the asylum system to access generous welfare benefits and a higher standard of living. This raises the question: are these individuals genuinely in need of protection, or are they taking advantage of a system meant to help those truly in danger? A common trend among asylum seekers is the phenomenon of home leave. Many of those who are granted asylum in Europe regularly return to their home countries for vacations, visiting family and friends. If the situation in their home country was as dangerous as they claimed, how could they freely travel back? This highlights a disturbing reality. Many asylum seekers are not fleeing war or persecution, but rather using the asylum process as a gateway to economic opportunity in Europe. Myth 1. Asylum seekers are fleeing war and persecution. One of the most pervasive myths about asylum seekers is that they are always fleeing war and persecution. The media often promotes the image of the asylum seeker as a desperate victim, running from violence or government oppression. However, this image is far from the whole truth. While it is true that some asylum seekers come from war-torn regions, many others come from countries that are not actively at war or in conflict. These individuals are not fleeing imminent danger, but are instead looking for a better life in Europe. They often come from countries where they have the option to live relatively peaceful lives, but where they still face economic hardship, lack of opportunity, or poor prospects for social mobility. They claim asylum in Europe, not because their lives are in danger, but because they hope to benefit from the more generous welfare systems in place. The issue is that the asylum process has become a tool for individuals seeking economic migration rather than genuine refuge. Politicians and the media often focus on the humanitarian narrative, painting asylum seekers as victims when in fact many are economic migrants who should not qualify for asylum. They exploit the system to gain entry to European countries where they can access benefits and improve their living standards without having a legitimate claim for asylum. Myth 2. Asylum seekers are victims of society. Another myth often perpetuated by the media is that asylum seekers are always the victims of society. This narrative overlooks the reality that many asylum seekers in Europe gradually become a burden on the very societies that welcome them. The costs associated with taking in asylum seekers are astronomical. From housing to healthcare to welfare and social services, these costs are largely funded by the native population's tax dollars. Many asylum seekers are reliant on social welfare systems without contributing anything in return. They often lack the skills or language proficiency to integrate into the job market and refuse to adapt to the values of their host societies. Instead of making an effort to integrate, they often isolate themselves, forming enclaves where they live off the welfare state. This creates a two-tier society, where the local population carries the burden of supporting a growing number of migrants who do not contribute to the economy. The issue is that the focus remains on the support they receive, rather than the massive resources they consume while offering little in return. While there may be some asylum seekers who try to integrate and contribute, they remain the minority. The reality is that the majority remain dependent on welfare, creating social tensions and reinforcing the perception that migrants are a drain on public resources. Myth 3. Asylum seekers are abusing the welfare system. The abuse of the welfare system by asylum seekers is a serious and often ignored issue. Migrants are frequently accused of excessively exploiting the social welfare systems of European countries. In countries like Germany, asylum seekers benefit from generous state support funded by taxpayers. In some cases, asylum seekers receive higher benefits than native citizens who have contributed to the system for years. One major issue is the prolonged duration of asylum procedures. During this time, asylum seekers have access to various social benefits without ever contributing to the economy. Many asylum seekers spend years in Europe without finding a job, despite living in countries that are already flooded with low-wage workers. Even when asylum seekers are allowed to work, they often face cultural and language barriers, making it difficult for them to find sustainable employment. This situation not only places a financial strain on the state, but also fuels resentment among native citizens, who feel that their tax money is being used to support people who are not making any meaningful contribution to society. The longer asylum seekers stay dependent on the welfare system, the more entrenched this cycle of dependency becomes. Myth 4. Asylum seekers don't bring crime. Another myth that is frequently promoted is that asylum seekers do not contribute to crime. This claim is patently false. In reality, many countries that have accepted asylum seekers are seeing rising crime rates, particularly among migrant communities. Asylum seekers are often involved in serious criminal activity, including drug trafficking, theft, and violent crimes. There are numerous reports of migrant groups being involved in criminal behavior, particularly in large cities where migrant populations are concentrated. These areas often become hotbeds for crime and radicalization. When migrants struggle to find work and live in social isolation, crime can become a way to survive or to gain power in their new environment. While not every migrant is a criminal, the rise in criminal behavior among migrant communities cannot be ignored. In urban centers, where migrants are often concentrated, crime is increasingly associated with these groups. The idea that asylum seekers are free from criminal tendencies is simply not true, and ignoring this fact only perpetuates the problems facing our cities. The impact on society. The negative impacts of asylum seekers on society cannot be overlooked. In many countries, rising tensions between native citizens and migrants are creating deep divides. Cultural differences and the perceived threat to social security are fueling resentment. The growing fear of crime, often attributed to migrants, is becoming more widespread, particularly in cities where migrant populations are larger. This situation is creating a society that is more polarized, with political parties opposed to liberal asylum policies gaining more support. These parties are increasingly seen as a voice of reason, reflecting the frustrations of citizens who feel their safety and social stability are at risk. Asylum seekers are often viewed not as a benefit to society, but as a threat to its very fabric. This polarization is dangerous and could ultimately lead to the breakdown of social cohesion. As long as the negative impacts of migration are ignored, we will continue to see a rise in political extremism and social fragmentation. Conclusion. In conclusion, the reality of asylum seekers and their impact on Europe is often far from the commonly accepted narrative. While many asylum seekers are indeed in need, we must also address the negative aspects of their migration. The abuse of welfare systems, rising crime rates, and growing social tensions cannot be ignored. The asylum process needs to be more effective, ensuring that only those who truly need protection are granted asylum. At the same time, we need to protect the welfare system from exploitation and ensure that migrants are properly integrated into society so they can contribute rather than becoming an additional burden. Europe must take a hard look at its asylum policies and make changes to prevent the continued strain on public services and social cohesion. Only by addressing the challenges of migration head-on can we build a society that is fair for both migrants and native citizens. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content on important societal issues. See you next time.